You were not born unbreakable. You were born soft, breathing through fear, shaped by noise, trained to react instead of endure. Somewhere along your path, the world taught you to flinch before it taught you to stand, to doubt before it taught you to trust, to hurry before it taught you to breathe. And slowly, without ever announcing it, your mind learned to bend instead of remain. In ancient Japan, they believed a broken sword can be reforged, but a broken mind becomes a prison. So they built warriors differently, not only with muscle and steel, but with silence, discipline, and unbearable presence. They understood what modern psychology now confirms in laboratories and brain scans. The mind does not first collapse from pain. It collapses from avoidance, from the habit of running when endurance is required. This is not a story about becoming fearless. Fear never leaves. This is a story about becoming unshakable while fear still exists. Our warrior does not enter this path seeking power. He enters it because his spirit is tired of fleeing. He carries an invisible weight, failure that whispers at night, doubt that tightens his breath, and the endless noise of an ego that refuses to rest. On this path, he will learn that mastery begins exactly where comfort ends, that silence is not emptiness but a weapon, and that the strongest mind is not loud, it is grounded. Today, the ancient system will test him. He will face fear without edges to hide behind. His transformation will not come from victory, but from endurance. Not from dominance, but from discipline. And when he finally stands again, he will no longer ask if he can be broken. He will already know the answer. If this path speaks to you, walk with us, stay, listen, and learn. Before the discipline, before the silence, the warrior was restless in a way no blade could cure. His body was strong, trained for impact, built for resistance, yet his mind jolted at the smallest pressure like cracked porcelain. One word of criticism could bruise him more deeply than a blow. One failure could echo through him for days. He moved constantly, training harder, pushing faster, chasing exhaustion as if motion itself were proof of progress. But beneath the sweat lived a quieter truth. He was running from the sound of his own doubt. At night, when the village slept, he sat alone with the noise inside his chest, the ego whispering that he must dominate or disappear. The fourth grave in the old training ground was never spoken of, but he often dreamed of it. And still, he told himself he was strong. Yet strength, as he was about to learn, is often the mask weakness chooses. The breaking did not come during battle. It came during laughter. A careless remark from another warrior, soft, almost playful, landed deeper than any strike. Something inside him folded inward. Rage rose, not outward, but downward, like a blade turned against its own sheath. That night, he found a locked drawer in his mind he had avoided for years. Inside were names he never spoke, moments he never forgave himself for, and a red thread of shame that stitched every memory together without mercy. Neuroscience would later name this pattern, how the amygdala hijacks reason, how emotion outruns logic when identity feels threatened. The ancients named it more simply, the ego panicking at exposure. He realized then that every enemy he had ever fought was easier than the one he had been feeding inside himself. And it was this quiet collapse that led him toward the mountain where silence waited. The mountain did not welcome him with signs or gates. It welcomed him with cold air, thin light, and a path so narrow it forced his shoulders to turn inward. At the summit stood the temple, wood darkened by centuries, its doors unmarked, its presence heavier than stone. Inside, the mentor waited. No title, no introduction. Only a man seated in stillness so complete it unsettled the room itself. Days passed without instruction. No questions were answered, no guidance was given. The warrior's mind began to riot inside its own cage. Silence, he discovered, was not peaceful. It was a mirror with no mercy. And in that mirror, The noise within him grew unbearable. The ego, when stripped of distraction, always reveals how frightened it truly is. On the seventh night, the warrior finally broke the stillness with his voice. It came out rough, almost foreign to him, as if speech itself had grown heavy in his throat. He demanded to know the method, the secret, the discipline that would harden his mind. The mentor did not answer with words. Instead, he rose, placed a single candle between them, and blew it out with one slow breath. The room fell into shadow. "Your mind is louder than flame," the mentor said at last. Nothing more. In modern science, they would speak of sensory deprivation, of how the brain panics when its usual inputs vanish. The ancients had already mapped this terror. They knew that when the outer world quiets, the inner world screams. The warrior felt it now. Memories rising without warning, fears without language, guilt without location. The silence was no longer empty. It was crowded. And for the first time, he understood that his enemy was not outside these wooden walls. What awaited him next was not wisdom, but the first taste of deliberate suffering. Perfect, continuing the journey. The training did not begin with fire or ceremony. It began with cold. Before dawn, the warrior was led to a stone basin fed by melted mountain snow. The water did not invite him in. It warned him. When he stepped inside, his breath shattered, his muscles rebelled, and every instinct screamed retreat. The mentor said nothing. No encouragement, no cruelty, only presence. The warrior learned his first lesson without words. Discipline is not force. It is consent to discomfort. Days followed in identical silence, repetition without applause, exhaustion without recognition. Each movement stripped of urgency. Each breath slowed until it felt unnatural. The town below believed warriors were forged in conquest. Up here, he was learning they are forged in restraint. But restraint, once learned, would soon demand a far greater price. Continue with part 2. By the 10th morning, something subtle began to shift. The cold still burned, the stone still punished his knees, the repetition still hollowed his muscles. But the panic no longer ruled the moment. He discovered a strange space between sensation and reaction, a thin, almost invisible thread of choice. Modern neuroscience would call it stress inoculation, the rewiring of threat into tolerance. The ancients called it tempering the spirit. Yet not all suffering faded. Some grew louder. Old memories returned during stillness, faces he had avoided, moments he buried, words that never asked forgiveness. The discipline had quieted his body, but it had awakened his past. And in that awakening, a deeper enemy began to breathe. The suffering of the body had merely opened the door to the suffering of the soul. There was no arena for this battle, no opponent to strike, no sound of steel. The mentor led him instead into a narrow chamber beneath the temple, where light fell through a single crack in the ceiling and dust drifted like slow ash. In the center of the floor lay a burned ledger, names blackened into the wood, some half erased, some still legible. The warrior did not recognize the names, yet something in his chest tightened as if he did. No one ever explained whose they were. Left alone in that chamber, the silence changed texture. It was no longer wide and open. It pressed inward. Memories rose uninvited. His first public failure, the face of a man he once betrayed to protect his own pride, the moment he chose reputation over truth. His breath shortened. The ego searched desperately for an escape story, and when the stories failed, the real fear finally stood up. The fear did not wear a monstrous shape. It arrived as a simple question he had avoided his entire life. Who are you when no one is watching, and there is nothing left to prove? His heartbeat answered before his mind could. The body always tells the truth first. He felt shame move through his ribs like cold water, guilt coil behind his eyes, and the strange grief of a self he had abandoned long ago. Neuroscience would describe this as the collapse of narrative identity, the moment the brain loses its protective story and stands naked before reality. The ancients called it meeting the shadow without armor. He did not defeat the fear. He did not reason with it. He stayed, breath by breath, tremor by tremor, until the fear, starved of reaction, began to thin. And in that thinning, something quiet and unbreakable took its first breath. What was awakened in that chamber would soon be tested in the world of sound and motion. Perfect. We move into the quiet after the storm. The change did not announce itself. There was no moment of triumph, no thunder inside the chest. It arrived like a lowered flame. The warrior still felt fear, still felt strain, still heard the murmur of doubt at the edges of thought. But something fundamental had shifted its position. Fear no longer sat on the throne. It stood to the side, waiting for permission it no longer received. His movement slowed, not with weakness, but with control. Each breath began to fall into rhythm as if guided by an invisible metronome buried deep in the ribs. The hunger to be seen, to dominate, to be remembered began to starve. In its place grew a new appetite, the ability to endure without witnesses. The ancient system had not strengthened his will. It had rewritten his relationship with pressure itself. And the world beyond the mountain was about to test whether this stillness was real. In the training yard below the temple, a red thread hung tied between two pillars, trembling in the wind. The mentor cut it without ceremony. The thread fell. The warrior did not move. Once, that sound would have pulled him forward, hungry for reaction, eager for proof. Now, stillness held him where impulse once ruled. Modern science would say his vagal tone had strengthened, that the nervous system had learned safety without escape. The ancients would say something simpler. The spirit had finally learned where to stand. Strength became quieter. Power learned to bow. Even suffering changed its language. It no longer shouted, it informed. And in that informing, the warrior felt an unfamiliar gravity. Not the weight of fear, but the weight of responsibility. What he carried back into the world would soon be tested by noise, conflict, and the old echoes of his name. Perfect. We arrive at the return. The road back into the world was louder than he remembered. The market shouted. Steel rang in careless hands. Old rivalries still paced the same streets like restless ghosts. But inside him, the noise no longer found its echo. He walked through voices without being pulled by them. Eyes turned before he spoke, not in fear. In recognition of something unnamed, but felt. A boy dropped a wooden sword at his feet by accident. Once, that sound would have sparked dominance. Now, it only measured his breath. The village had not changed. That was the unsettling truth. Only the one who returned had been rewritten, and the world would soon notice what no longer reacted. Because the final test of mastery is never survival. It is restraint. A man from his former life confronted him at the edge of the square. Voice sharp with old grievance. Words coded in half-forgotten rage. The crowd leaned in, sensing the shape of conflict before it formed. This was the moment the old self would have fed on. The moment that once gave him identity. The body felt the familiar surge of heat, the chemical call to dominate. But something else answered first. Stillness. The kind that arrives before speech, not after. He bowed his head, not in submission, but in control, and the man's fury met no mirror. Without resistance, the anger collapsed into something smaller, almost embarrassed. Later that night, alone beneath the open rafters, the warrior felt the quiet return. Not relief, not pride. A deeper tension, one that comes from knowing restraint is heavier than reaction. Modern psychology would call this delayed reward, executive control overriding impulse. The ancients would say only this: mastery is not loud enough to be celebrated. As the village lights dimmed and the last echoes of the day faded, a thought drifted through him without warning. If a mind like this can be built, how many are still being broken without ever knowing why? True strength is not born in the clash of blades. It is not forged in applause, nor proven in the noise of victory. It is shaped in the long corridor of discipline where no one is watching and the mind is forced to stand without costume. The warrior learned this not through triumph, but through the daily agreement to remain when everything inside begged to flee. Each small suffering became a seed. Each moment of restraint became a root. And over time, without ceremony, the mind began to grow heavier than fear. Modern science now whispers what the ancients carved into silence. The brain becomes what it repeatedly survives without escape. The nervous system learns courage not through adrenaline, but through breath held steady in pressure. Yet even now, this truth is hidden from the many. The world still worships speed, still rewards reaction, still confuses noise for power, and somewhere, unseen, another fragile mind is beginning to bend. Because the most dangerous breaking is the one that happens quietly. There are towns where anger is inherited like a surname, where fear is taught before language, where children learn to react long before they learn to breathe. There are men who never meet a mountain, never sit in silence, never feel the thin thread between sensation and choice. They grow powerful in motion, but fragile in stillness. And no one ever tells them what the ancients knew, that the mind breaks not because it is weak, but because it was never trained to remain. The warrior understands this now. His presence has become a quiet disturbance in the pattern of things. He does not preach, he does not recruit. He walks, and in his walking, questions begin to form in the people who watch him. Not admiration, not envy. Something more unsettling. Recognition. Because once you witness a mind that does not obey fear, you can no longer pretend yours has no choice. And somewhere tonight, in a room with no witnesses and no rescue coming, a fragile mind is standing at the edge of its first real silence, unaware that this moment will decide what it becomes.